Welcome to another episode of The Evaluation Couch, the podcast where we talk about career growth and the field of evaluation. I'm your host, Maria Montenegro. Can you believe it's already been 1 year since the creation of DOGE was framed as a way to make US government more efficient, reshaping how agencies manage data, staffing, and strategy? Over the months that followed, core parts of our field, such as independent evidence, rigorous evaluation, and long-term international development where many of us evaluators worked, came under intense scrutiny and major disruptions. Grants have been canceled, roles have been cut or shifted, USA as a standalone agency has been shut down, and institutions that once focused and valued evidence have had to adapt and shift to new priorities. In this 3-episode series, 1 year on, I'm inviting guests to reflect on how our field has changed, what opportunities have arisen, and how we are adapting to ensure that there is a future for evaluation. In this first episode, I had the honor of sitting with Karen Jackson, who was the president of the American Evaluation Association for the 2025 term. Karen joins to reflect on her leadership during perhaps one of the most disruptive years for the field of evaluation. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here with us today. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience before we get started?
Sure. Maria, I just first want to say thank you so much for inviting me to your platform. I'm Karen Jackson. I am the past president for the American Evaluation Association, and I'm also an associate professor of leadership studies at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro. And I'm also a small business owner. I run a community engaged research slash evaluation firm named Catalyst Innovation Services. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here today. And as you shared in your introduction, Karen, you have worn several hats, professional hats, in this past year, especially being the AEA president, being a faculty member, and also being a consultant. Can you tell me a little bit of what that looked like in practice? How did you balance all of that? And how did each role inform one another, especially in the context of the last year, which was a very eventful year, as we're going to discuss later on in this episode?
Yeah, it was. The past year was a lot. And, I would say sometimes the ways that things were kind of like intertwined, sometimes it was like really stretching me as a person, as a human, as a leader. And especially, once the executive orders started coming out in January, that was happening live. We were in DC for the first board meeting when some of the first executive orders started coming out. So like the kind of bandwidth I thought I was going to need for this role, for the AEA presidency role, became bigger pretty quickly. Thankfully, my faculty workload formally recognized my service role, even though the scale of the moment kind of exceeded what we had anticipated. I made a conscious decision to not run any contracts through my consulting business. So during my presidential year, so I made a real sacrifice financially, but that was important to me ethically and relationally. And what surprised me most was how much these roles really informed one another in very meaningful ways. My work as a faculty member and a researcher, particularly in community engaged leadership, ethics, and like systems change, that kind of shaped how I approached governance and member engagement, as well as the crisis that the field of evaluation is facing. I was drawing from, frameworks that I teach about: adaptive leadership, transformative leadership, community engaged leadership, and in order to help me navigate kind of the conflict, the uncertainty. And at the same time, the presidency reshaped my own research, my own scholarship, my own teaching. Leading AEA, I think, during this period of disruption positioned me to think more concretely about leadership and how it unfolds under pressure, not in theory, like in the classroom, but in real institutions with real constraints. I teach and I write. I feel like it's led to me, made my teaching and my writing like have a much deeper appreciation for governance and organizational capacity and the emotional labor it takes. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. all the sacrifices that it requires to be in the position that you've been and the learnings you've had and how it's informed your different roles. And one aspect that I appreciated that you've mentioned right now is the emotional labor. And I think we're going to get into a bit of what that experience has been like for you later on. But I'm curious to know because we don't often get the chance to hear from presidents around what motivated you to take on this role and how did it fit in your career journey?
No, it was a journey. It was definitely a journey. Even the decision making was a journey. My decision was shaped by like personal grounding. I'm a grounding person. I'm an energy person. So it was shaped by, I needed to feel grounded, but also, it was also like there was this, I felt a responsibility because I had served, on the AEA board as a board member at large. Before submitting my nomination packet, I spent time talking with my family, with my mentors, my colleagues, and university leadership about the sacrifices this role would require and whether I was ready for this role. I was also in the midst of submitting my tenure packet the same
Mm,
year. And that placed me, I was already kind of in this reflective posture because I was doing that and thinking about the trajectory of my career and how my scholarship, my service, and my leadership were kind of all coming together. So professionally, having had served on the board back in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the George Floyd era, I feel like that and having had time to reflect on that gave me like a clear view of the organization's strengths and where it had edges. I call them growing edges,
mhm,
places for growth. So when I left my board service, I had a set of like imperatives that I left the board with. I literally prepared like a set of imperatives, and they were around governance clarity, board development, attention to policy, and financial sustainability. And I was, still connected to many people who were still on the board. And when the new approached me, I reached out to see like, have y'all made progress on any of these things? And I was happy to learn that they had made progress on the strategic plan, which had not been updated in 10 years. And that motivated me, right? It motivated me. And I also feel like where the field of evaluation is and was in 2024 when I was thinking about this, or I'm sorry, in 2023 when I was thinking about this, and all that has happened since, all the evolution of the field. Also, I feel like, I teach research methods, I teach research design, I teach a lot of the tools that we use in the field. And I'm watching how the things that we're dealing with now are complex, right? They're things that are grounded in equity, community, ethical reflexivity, systems thinking. So I felt like my own work sits at the intersection of those things. And the opportunity to sit in the presidency felt like a natural extension of that arc. So not
mhm.
just leading an organization, but helping a field wrestle with who it's becoming in the sense that the presidency is not a departure from my career path. It was a deepening of it.
Mm-hmm. And I wasn't aware, Karen, that you actually had been a board member during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the George Floyd.
Yeah,
So it sounds like you were not new to having crisis, but
no.
of course, we know you had a very eventful year as the president of AEA. What three words would you use to describe what this past year has been?
Wow. The first, when I thought about that question, Maria, the first word that came up for me was loss. But I quickly, and this is just a part of my nature, I quickly moved to opportunity because if I sit in the loss too long, it can't, sometimes it's not good. So loss, opportunity, and I know this is two words, inflection point. That's what came to me. Those are the three words, phrases that came to me when I thought about the past year. And I don't know if you want me to say more about the words, but that's loss, opportunity, and inflection
Mm.
point.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get into that right away. And I think that inflection point is very related to what AEA used to describe the last year as a watershed moment for the field of evaluation. From your vantage point as a president, what made this such a pivotal moment, such an inflection point, and how did you navigate those challenges?
Yeah, I know. I used that word, I think, in something that I wrote back in the spring of last year about watershed, the watershed moment. And where I was sitting at that time was like there were multiple systemic shocks all at once: political, financial, organizational, professional, individuals, right? Humans having a moment that was a huge system shock. And I don't want to discount the fact that we really haven't recovered from COVID, right? Organizations, cities, governments are still trying to recover from COVID. And now we have a government that, in some instances, felt hostile to us. And I felt like what it required of the board and the staff of AEA to fundamentally rethink how the association governs, leads, and supports its members in real time. Externally, the federal executive orders were disrupting the evaluation field. It was affecting contracts, jobs, access to data. I mean, these are all things that in our professional lives are real. It created this sense of, immediacy for advocacy. Where's our collective voice? I felt this tension of like members needed guidance. AEA was no longer operating in a stable professional environment. It was responding to crisis conditions in an ecosystem that it exists to serve. So internally, the association, many of you already know this, was facing a projected budget shortfall of 40%. We had governance gaps. We were, staff capacity, all of these things internally were all happening. And I feel like it exposed the limits of the organization that was relying on these legacy structures, informal practices to steward something that's really complex and global as a professional association. And it's not to say that this is unique to AEA. I do a lot of organizational development work. The students in my courses are leaders of nonprofits and all kinds of professional organizations. So I deal with this daily, and it's not an AEA thing. Like I said, are all still reeling from what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. So on top of that, we're now dealing with these government issues. So 2020-2025 became that turning point, that inflection point for AEA to begin to think about governance. We did have the strategic plan to build upon, and I'm so glad that we did spend 2024 doing that work. It was a tough year, but we were positioned to clarify purpose, to strengthen our governance capacity, to try to align our leadership practices with the complexity that we were facing in the moment as a field.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can only imagine how challenging that was, especially given the limitations of the organization and meeting all of the different demands and opinions of what members thought AEA should be doing or not be doing. And I think all of these and the discussions that you were having internally on the board led to the October 2025 message, which was, at least for me, the motivation for having this conversation, where you wrote that the AEA chose not to adapt quietly to what was happening in our field and made a call for organizations to join what you termed the morning after coalition. I would love to hear more about what the morning after coalition is and what the idea behind this call to action was.
Yeah. Well, the idea behind it, of course, was the tension, the calamities, the complexities, all the things that I just talked about. But the phrase morning after, what I really meant by that was to signal urgency. How do we come together with a collective response in the immediate aftermath of the federal actions that were disrupting our field suddenly, right? And then the core idea behind it wasn't about branding or any formal entity, but it was about naming a posture of leadership, choosing not to adapt quietly, and not to retreat into as an individual survival strategy, but to come together, right? How can we come together across organizations to make meaning of what was happening to us? And how can we coordinate in a principled way with a principled response in support of our field and the communities that we serve? So, if I could rephrase it today, I might use language that's more aligned with my own leadership values, right? How I understand organizational change, something like collective sense making, or putting together an action network or a community of practice for navigating disruption. What I was really calling for was shared leadership across professional associations, evaluators, funders, and community partners, right? For a couple of things. One being to interpret the implications of the policy changes for evaluation practices and our livelihoods as evaluators. Two, to support evaluators who are being directly impacted. And lastly, to protect the integrity of evaluation as a public good during a period of political volatility. So with this, that the spirit of that call to action was grounded in community engaged leadership, collective capacity building. It was an invitation to move from isolated reactions to coordinated learning, mutual support, and shared advocacy. The
Mhm.
emphasis was less on creating a new coalition with formal membership and more about cultivating relational infrastructure, spaces where organizations could align values, share knowledge, respond in ways that are ethical, strategic, and rooted in care for the field of evaluation. So the Morning Coalition was less about launching something formal. We wanted to adapt, but not quietly, and we wanted to do it together.
What has been the response since that message went out and that call to action? Has anything happened? What's been the momentum it created?
I think, there was, from my perspective, there's several. I can talk about it from the board level, and then I can talk about it from what we learned from members. So at the board level, the response was immediate, and I feel like there was substance because you probably have heard about the Responding to Emerging Demands advisory group that we put together to help listen to members track impacts of the federal actions on the field and to advise the board on how to communicate and advocate and mobilize responsibly. That work, alongside our other governance and policy efforts, I think reflects that the board was taking everything seriously, taking its role seriously, taking its stewardship of the association seriously, and facing the disruption rather than retreating. From the members, the response was supportive and challenging. Many evaluators expressed gratitude for AEA naming what people were experiencing, but we didn't do it fast enough. People wanted things to happen fast. They were losing contracts fast. The instability in the federal evaluation infrastructure was happening quickly, and the uncertainty of the future of the field. They didn't feel like we responded fast enough. At the same time, we were also hearing strong feedback about how change is being experienced on the ground. So there were concerns raised by TIG leaders about the conference redesign, and we're still grappling with that. There were concerns about volunteer labor and in what ways could members engage? What were the pathways? Where could they connect? So I actually see that the tension that I'm sharing with you is a sign of a good, healthy organization. And what do I mean by that? About every 7 to 10 years, organizations reach inflection points. That's why inflection point came up for me. This is not just an AEA thing. This is an organization, community, any group of people that's been together for 7 to 10 years are experiencing this right now. And we just need to be clear about our logic and be transparent about what it means for what all of this means for the future of the association to the extent that we know. Community engaged leadership means we don't shy away from these conversations. It means we hold space for disagreement. We name the trade offs honestly, especially in a moment of real financial constraint, which I mentioned, and to stay in relationship while we make these difficult decisions. So I feel like the response from both the board as well as from members was engagement, pushback, collaboration, and learning all at once. And that's what it looks like when a professional community is actively grappling with change rather than quietly absorbing it.
Mhm. Thank you. And I like hearing your expertise from what other organizations go through, what is expected in leadership and in changes across organizations. And I think you mentioned something that we've had discussions about this, you and I, on a one-on-one conversation about how many times members are not necessarily familiar with the amount of work and debate and internal conversations that happened before these decisions are brought into a public space. And I can only imagine the amount of conversations and debates that happened, even though it seemed like you didn't act fast enough as an organization. I know that there was a lot of work behind the scenes happening ahead of this announcement being made. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that experience was and what happened throughout the whole months before October 2025?
So, I kind of back up to when Tiffany Toby came to me and said, "Are you ready to run for president?" This was 2023. And I was like, no. And the Nuke is really awesome, and they have strategy with what they do. So I know that because Tiffany lives in Greensboro too, so she works at UNC Greensboro. So we have lunch on the regular. And so Zachary also was a part of that strategy, because Zachary, of course, reached out to say, "Are you ready?" And I told him no. And again, I was, submitting my tenure packet at the same time. And so, they did plant a seed. And I did at some point want to run for president. I just didn't think it was going to be 2023. But Tiffany took me to lunch again, and it led me to start talking to my mentors. I had two faculty members who served in the same program where I teach at North Carolina A&T. I talked with both of them about it. I talked to other mentors. I talked to some former AEA presidents who are good friends of mine. I talked to other board colleagues that I had served with on the board, and shared, what would be my why, and also the personal cost of the role. And I wanted to learn, what is it truly, am I ready? What does it truly look like to lead at this level, and am I ready? So, when the executive orders began coming out in 2025, the tension inside the board was immediate and human, right? So I'm fast forwarding now. So I talked to all of these people. These people are also part of I call it my inner circle kind of coaching, mentoring team. So I told them when I agreed to run, I said, if I win, you have signed up to support me throughout this whole process. So I had all of these people kind of on a council informally, and I was not making decisions on my own. I was reaching out to this network. So when the executive order started and the tension inside the board was there, you know, literally people were in the room getting calls, getting text messages about their colleagues losing jobs. They were losing contracts. It was all happening in real time, right? So people are saying, what do we do? What do we say? How do we make sense of this? And at the same time, we were thinking about our own constraints as a board and the organization. And, there were infrastructure things we needed to do to shore up and get ready for all these policy shocks, right? And so all of that was happening real time. I was spending, during the first few months of 2025, I was spending a lot of time and not getting a lot of sleep trying to help AEA respond and to be supportive to the membership. What ultimately shaped the decisions was, a shared recognition that neutrality does not mean silence in the face of harm to the field and the people who constitute the field. We were intentional, even though it did take us a little bit of time to pull together the Responding to Emerging Demands group and for them to get, a survey out to membership to find out what was happening. We did have the evaluation leadership roundtable discussion in early March. That was very intentional because we wanted to give members an opportunity to come together, to hear from leaders, to hear from our AEA attorney about the things that we were grappling with and what the field was grappling with. And as weeks passed, it became, even more clear that we needed to do even more. Membership were asking for grounding. They were asking for language. How do we process this? What does this mean for my evaluator identity? So, we were doing everything we could within the board, the staff, my members. It was my informal advisory group. It shaped, I think, the relationships that are now established. I think a lot of relationships had to be established. A lot of our partnerships had to be strengthened within the association and across the association and outside of the association. And I feel like we didn't choose to be loud and reactive on purpose, and I'm really glad we did. We chose not to adapt quietly, but because the moment demanded presence, it demanded care, it demanded transparency, and we did all of that because we realized the future of our field is imperative. We know that how the world values evidence, we get to determine that. These executive orders don't get to determine that. We, as the field of evaluation, we are the voice of the field. We get to determine the value of what we do and and the value of evidence that's used to make decisions in this world.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Karen. One thing I noticed is you shared how your inner circle helped you get grounded on your why and how your why helped you navigate all of these challenges, but you didn't share what your why was. What was your why?
What was my why? So I think my why is not just one thing. I love what evaluation gives us the opportunity to do. Evaluation gives us an opportunity to help people, organizations, communities to think about what they're doing or what they'd like to do in a way that's organized, in a way that's reflective, in a way that helps them get grounded and rooted in what it is that they're trying to accomplish and to do things very intentionally. And so that is a good description of how I like to live my life. And I feel like evaluation as a field called to me, and I was ready for the call. I think another part of my why goes back to just my family and the whole, I say that volunteerism is in my DNA. My great grandmother on my dad's side, Arnett Giles, she was Volunteer of the Year in 1971, which is the year I was born. My family on both sides, service is a big part of who we are. We serve our communities. And so, my why is rooted, I think, in my who I am professionally, but also who I am personally.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And Karen, one thing that your call to action was for organizations, and it sounds like there's been a lot of work at the board level to develop partnerships, to work with other organizations, as well as internal groups to AEA. In addition to that, I think AA members also have a play to role, and especially if we're trying to make a case for evidence. As you said, how the world views evidence is kind of on us and how we frame it. So, what is your hope for how AEA members and members of our evaluation community step up in this moment? How do we join that broader call to action?
So I think one of the biggest, and this could just be me, but I feel like a misconception of VOPEs is that there's something like separate from membership, almost like a service provider rather than a living kind of member led ecosystem. In reality, we know that our VOPEs are shaped by the people who show up:
Mm,
the board, the TIGs, the working groups, the task forces. These are all members, right? The organization doesn't exist apart from us. The organization is us. So I think just like in communities with people, VOPEs are always becoming, right? Like we're people are becoming our VOPEs are becoming. They require attention, time, trust building, relationship building, a willingness to sit, right, in attention, to understand the constraints of the organization and the field, navigation of disagreement, all of those things kind of shape our participation. I When I was thinking about this question, I thought about, John Lewis says freedom is not free. Got to work for it. And so we are facing a lot of challenges that we will have to it will take all of us, to our whole evaluation ecosystem, to stand up to the challenges we're facing. And I know we might not like to think about democracy, but we're a form of democracy. It's of the membership, by the membership, for the membership. We all have to show up.
mhm. What are some practical ways in which people outside formal positions within the AEA governance structure can do
Mhm.
to show up more than what we might be doing right now?
It's funny you ask this. I was thinking about like how I got to be a member, right?
Mm.
I didn't know anything about AEA or VOPAs at some one point in my life. And someone said to me, "Hey, you want to go to an AEA?" And I was like, "What's that?" So I came to a conference and I had a great time. Yeah, I think that's one thing AEA members are really good at, is figuring out how to have a good time. But then I was invited to volunteer my time. And that's how I started to get connected. That's how I started to develop relationships. Is I joined a TIG. Now I know that's not always what people want to do, or it might not feel comfortable for people to do that. I think if you just meet one person and ask that person, "What are you doing? How are you participating? Or how do you recommend I participate?" I think those are also, you don't have to join a TIG. You can just talk to another person. who's in the, because it might not be that you're volunteering inside the AEA. It might be another VOPE, or it might be another group. It might be a regional association or some of our local affiliates. But there are all kinds of ways to get connected and to get involved. I hope that everybody wants to be in a leadership role. I hope, there's always pathways to leadership, but not everybody's comfortable with a title or a role. But you can make a friendship, right? You can meet someone for coffee or have a virtual coffee and have a conversation about the work that you're doing. And I think all of those things are what helps to build our evaluation ecosystem.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. There's so many different ways in which people can show up, and it doesn't always have to be volunteering because that's also not necessarily accessible to everyone. As you mentioned, there are sacrifices that people make in taking on these roles.
But we want to be connected, right? We want to feel like we're a part. And so, yes, like just take 30 minutes and talk to a colleague. I
Mhm.
think all of those things can lead to over time, right? Oh, I didn't wasn't AEA president immediately. I've been a part of the association for over 17 years. So but I started with a conversation, and that's how I got here. One conversation at a time.
Thank you for that. Okay, so looking forward, now that it's been almost a year since all of these changes started, where do you see opportunities for our field to adapt, to strengthen its credibility, or to demonstrate our unique value?
Mm, we cannot avoid technology. AI technology and all the things around it are a part of our practice already, whether we recognized it or not before we started seeing artificial intelligence. These tools aren't going away. So I think evaluators are uniquely positioned to ask the hard questions about ethics, bias, governance. How do we center the human in our use of these tools for the field? I think that it's up to us again to shape that conversation and to shape those methods and to be sure that they align with our values as evaluators. I also see an opportunity in how we communicate the value of evaluation and who we consider to be a part of that audience. I think that is expanding if we allow it to expand. And I think that's definitely something that AEA as the organization is grappling with. The ways that we disseminate knowledge is shifting, and so are the communities, right? That we use and that benefit from evaluation. And I feel like that's an opening for us to move kind of beyond some of the things that we kind of traditionally do as evaluators and to deepen our practice. We need to be talking to people. We need to be talking with people across disciplines, across communities, across organizations, and embracing some of those things and leading those conversations as things evolve. And I think, to strengthen credibility, we have to show, not just claim our relevance. We got to show it. We got to be it. We need to make evaluation accessible, and we need to be sure that our values not only in the methods, it's in how we help people learn, adapt, and make better decisions.
hmm Thank you for that. And Karen, as we wrap up, I don't know if it was obvious for the audience that your expertise, what you do in your academic world, is really focused on shared leadership, and you actually teach this. This is your area, and I'm so curious to know, after leading AA through this very complex and very eventful year, what are some of the key lessons that you've had for yourself around leadership?
Maria, I really appreciated this question because I had not had time to think about it. So thank you. I appreciate all the questions, but this one really, it almost stumped me for a minute, and I had to sit, and I wanted my head, heart, and gut to be connected as I thought about my response. And the first thing that came up for me was curiosity. I feel like one of the biggest lessons, I try to stay curious, and as a researcher and evaluator, it's one of the things that I do feel like we grapple with because we do know a lot. And when you know a lot, it's easy to kind of lean into what you know. So you have to kind of force yourself up away from that and just to wonder sometimes what might be missing, right? Instead of going into the default settings. I feel like this year has also deepened my commitment to growing my own capacity to evolve. There's a lot of complexity to what we do and how we lead and how systems are folding and unfolding. And I feel like we are being positioned to learn, unlearn, relearn. I feel like, we talk a lot about power. I think that seeing our own power, seeing where we are and how we have power to speak into this moment is huge. I know that community engaged leadership, which is, I have a book coming out this year on that topic, is that the ways that we lead from a community engaged perspective, the relationship building, the trust building, the preparation, the reflection, seeing power being shared across groups. Those things are foundational to the work that we do. And that's how we can, I think, build capacity. And I think finally, I'll just say, I have a renewed appreciation for people in the trenches,
Mm.
even when we disagree. Because trust me, it's not always, we don't always see eye to eye. And I feel like some of the reasons we don't is because we're coming at things from different perspectives. But as evaluators, I feel like we have, as a part of our values, that's one of the things that we do, and we have to work on it. We have to work on it. So there will always be something that's worth standing up for. We are facing uncertainty, but I think that we are equipped as a field to lean into the uncertainty, to do it together, to stand on the things that are established for us in the field, to care for each other in the midst of this, and to remember who we are as humans. Those are the things that I'm carrying forward with me as I'm in my past presidency and all that is to come as a result of the work that I've been able to be engaged in this field. Maria, I'm thankful for the moment, and thank you for giving me space to reflect and to talk more about this work.
No, thank you, Karen, for everything you've shared. And also, thank you for your service. I don't know if you get told that enough, but you had a very challenging year. And I think throughout you showed a lot of intentionality and thoughtfulness. And at least I always felt like there was openness from AEA for members. So I just want to say thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing your book and the next steps that you take in your career and continuing to learning about leadership from you.
You're welcome, Maria, and thank you. And I look forward to watching you continue to grow in the field and lead the field. That's what you're doing. I see you as a great leader. So thank you.